So to get started, we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between elder financial exploitation and fraud. They're both very similar in that they have the same kind of end goal of a monetary benefit or gain for the perpetrator. Financial exploitation or financial abuse is most often perpetrated by someone that the victim knows and trusts. So this might be a caregiver, a family member, someone within their support system. And more often, fraud and scams are perpetrated by someone that the victim does not know. It's a stranger, sometimes not even located in the same place as them. So it could be someone in another country. And what you'll see, and we'll talk about romance scams a little bit later in the presentation, but this is a particular scam where the victim might believe that they know and trust that person. And unfortunately, people are not always who they say they are. And so when we see fraud and scams, we most often see them perpetrated by someone not known to the victim. And of course, we're going to be talking about technology. We all use technology in our daily lives, and older adults are really no different. In fact, we're using technology to share this information with you all today. Some really interesting data. The AARP did a study back in 2020, and they found that people 55 years old and older are really leading very digitally infused lives. They found about 2/3 of people within that age group use online banking on a weekly basis. Which when you really think about it, it makes sense, right? Because as we age, we may not have as much, mobility or ability to go out and access things in person. People might have barriers to accessing transportation. They may have physical, disabilities or, challenges that would prevent them from going to the bank, for example. And so being able to access that online creates a lot of accessibility where we otherwise didn't see that. And their usage of online banking was actually higher than adults ages 18 to 44, which I think can feel a little surprising at times. They also found that a large majority of older adults have a smartphone, and so they have ways to connect to the internet. They're using apps. They're using technology in ways that, even though these generations maybe didn't grow up using technology, I think it's oftentimes a misconception that they aren't engaging in technology at all. And really, we can see based on the data that they do have access to this information, and they're using it in their daily lives. And so it certainly plays a role in making things more accessible to them, but it also can create ways for perpetrators of financial fraud and financial crimes to exploit and target them. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashton now to kind of walk through some of the different types of scams and fraud that we see.
Thanks, Kim, and hi, everyone. Now, like Kim said, I want to lay the groundwork with some stats and some types of scams that we see. So, newly released data from the Federal Trade Commission shows that consumers reported losing more than $12.5 billion to fraud in 2024, which is a 25% increase over losses in 2023. So, this problem is really increasing, not going away, unfortunately. According to the FTC's data book, this number is not driven by an increase in fraud reports. In fact, the number of reports actually remained stable, which means that the percentage of people who reported losing money to a fraud or scam increased by double digits. In 2023, we saw that 27% of people who reported a fraud said they lost money, but in 2024, that figure jumped to 38%. So as you can see from some of these stats on the screen, this is a very high dollar victimization type, and there is a lot of money being lost here by victims. Next slide.
I just wanted to jump in really quickly to Ashton to add that What we're seeing in the research and the data is that older adults are actually targeted less frequently than younger adults right now, but they are losing more money when they are targeted. So I think that's an interesting statistic, is I think we oftentimes think that older adults are the most targeted population, and we're seeing that shift, that younger adults, in the 20 to 30 to 40 age range are being targeted more often, but they're losing less money when they are targeted. I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Kim. I think a lot of these stats are very surprising, but then kind of thinking about it, some of it does make sense once you dig in a bit. So it's known that financial crimes do have, of course, impacts beyond the money, right? And that can be very similar to the effects of violent crime on victims, which people often find surprising. Nearly 2/3 of victims reported at least one serious non-financial cost, like severe stress, anxiety, difficulty sleeping, or depression after being victimized. Social isolation is a big factor in a lot of these scams, and perpetrators often target older adults that are isolated and may not have strong support systems in place. And as we know, the pandemic also increased isolation for a lot of people, especially older adults who were more at risk, and so we're staying home even more. Social distancing caused many older adults to lose their entire networks of trust. No one was really checking in on them regularly, seeing them regularly. On a 9-point loneliness scale, for every additional point that a person indicated, they were 12% more likely to engage with a scam. And there are many reasons that a scam victim may choose not to share their victimization, and social isolation, not having someone to share it with, is just one of these factors. So now let's talk about some of the tactics. I'm sure that you all have seen a lot of these in, different scam texts or emails that you get. One of these is phantom riches. So if it seems too good to be true, it often is. This tactic really makes the opportunity seem guaranteed. It's risk-free. You'll get so much money, high reward. But like I said, if it seems too good to be true, it often is. Social consensus is another, and this tactic targets our desire to belong. If the scammer makes it appear that we would be the only one not taking this opportunity, they really target our FOMO. We may want to buy in more. Source credibility, scammers are great at appearing as experts. They will often build up their profiles to show degrees, experience, and affiliations with reputable people or organizations to make it seem like you can really trust them for this opportunity. Reciprocity, so this tactic may bring you in by doing something for you, like a free lunch or a service. And scarcity. This tactic tries to make you act fast so that you don't have adequate time to think it over and reason your way out of it and recognize that it is a scam. So now we'll talk about some of the specific types of scams that we see. One of these is the sweepstakes scam. So I'm sure you've all gotten that phone call or text that you won $1 million from whatever organization. These scams falsely claim that the person has won the lottery but does need to pay a fee to collect their winnings. These often come from an 876 phone number area code. Next are phone scams. So these are, we're all glued to our phones, so these are particularly prevalent. There are a variety of phone scams, including investment and credit card fraud, lottery scams, identity theft, and falsely selling goods. More and more phone scams are using text messaging in addition to phone calls. I know one that I've been getting lately is that I have an unpaid toll. We don't have toll roads in Arizona, so I know that one's a scam. Next, we have grandparent scams. So these are specifically targeted at older adults. The perpetrators will contact the individual claiming to be their grandchild or claiming that their grandchild is in trouble and needs money. So they're in jail, they got in a car accident, something like that. This person may claim to be the police, the FBI, a lawyer, a doctor to gain the victim's trust. They are trying to force the victim into making an emotional rather than a rational decision. If someone hears that, they might panic. They might just send the money instead of pausing and saying, let me call my grandchild and make sure that this is legitimate. Technology has created new and creative ways for these perpetrators to target older adults. AI technology can be used to mimic the voice of someone known to the victim, like that grandchild themselves. Is spoofing. So this is another way that technology can be used to scam or exploit older adults. This is a relatively easy and accessible technology that allows perpetrators to disguise or mask their identity. For example, they can disguise their caller ID to show up as a known contact in your phone, like their child's name or their grandchild's name, or using the victim's area code, so they may be more likely to answer. Next are tech checks. So these scams usually start with a phone call or a pop-up warning on a computer, indicating that there's a computer problem and giving a number to call to fix it. The scammer may claim to be a company like Microsoft or Apple or a computer security company. These scammers claim to have found a virus on the computer or other malware or hacking attempts on the victim's computer and pretend to be tech support, asking the victim to give them remote access to their computer. And then what happens next is eventually they will diagnose a non-existent problem and ask the victim to pay large sums of money for unnecessary or even harmful services to resolve the issue. And Microsoft estimates that 3.3 million Americans are victims of technical support scams annually, which amounts to a loss of about $1.5 billion a year. So malware and ransomware scams. This is the fraudulent practice of sending emails, pretending to be from reputable companies to get individuals to reveal personal information like credit card numbers or passwords. Whatever you download to your computer, as we know, could damage your computer or install ransomware that allows hackers to search through everything on your computer, like tax files, retirement accounts, bank accounts, things like that. I know Kim and I are both of the age of LimeWire, so that always had some weird pop-ups and things that came with it. Phishing emails and text messages may look like they're from a company that you know or trust. They may look like they're from your bank, your credit card company, a social networking site, an online payment website or app, or an online store. I know I get some that look like they're from Amazon. Phishing emails and text messages also often tell you a story to trick you into clicking on a link or opening an attachment that they send. They may tell you that they have noticed some suspicious activity or login attempts, or claim there's a problem with your account, your payment information, or they might include a fake invoice saying that you owe money for something. They may say that you have to confirm some personal information or click a link to make payment. And they may also say that you're eligible to register for a government refund or offer a coupon or other free item in exchange for clicking on this link. Romance scams. So like Kim mentioned earlier, there are people, unfortunately, that take advantage of older adults seeking relationships and intimacy through romance scams. Like we mentioned, older adults are increasingly using technology, and this does include online dating. Studies estimate that 12% of people ages 55 to 64 reported using an online dating site or app. Next, some signs of romance scams. So victims may be contacted through a dating site, and after trust is built between these two parties, the scammer asks for money for medical emergencies, hotel expenses, hospital bills, visas, whatever it may be. And this often happens very quickly. We talked about that scarcity tactic, and this is very similar. In sweetheart scams, these alleged suitors will woo the older adult, convincing them that love and care are their motivations, and ask to be included on bank accounts, property deeds, things like that. The suitors typically, after they are included on these items, will disappear along with that property. Some I have worked with victims of these crimes, and sometimes these victims will not self-identify as a victim, and may have difficulty cutting ties with the scammer or cooperating with law enforcement or prosecution efforts. We talked about the social isolation. If they feel that this person is a trusted person in their life and they are, not ready to let that go or recognize that this is a fraudulent relationship, that may be very difficult for them to accept. Now I'll turn it back over to Kim.
Thanks so much, Ashton. As you can see, there are a lot of different types of scams and fraud that are out there, and that really isn't even an exhaustive list, right? Like these are constantly evolving. There's always a new scam or, a new method out there. And we also wanted to talk about how does technology play a role? Because technology is also evolving very quickly, and creates new opportunities, and ways for perpetrators to target victims, and access information. So one of the first things that I think is important to note here is that technology is really changing the landscape around just old familiar devices that we all use day to day. Things like video camera monitoring, doorbells, the locks on our doors, our thermostats, our appliances even, watches, and so many other things are now like connected to the internet, right? We use Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and that's great. That makes our lives a lot easier. But it also opens up the door for people to hack those devices, to access people's information, and potentially their accounts and their money. And so it's changing things, and we might not necessarily be aware of it. These technologies can be used in a lot of creative ways, not only to monitor victims, but also to harass them or to control them. And we see this pretty frequently, happening also in domestic violence situations or stalking cases, where, they may trigger alerts or alarms, they may mess with their lights or music or, locking their doors, speaking to people through video monitors, or other, devices, changing their settings, controlling different home functions, as a way to, either threaten a victim or harass them. And I think this in particular with older adults is important to remember, because if an older adult, comes to you and says, weird things are happening in my house. My lights keep turning on and off and I'm not doing anything. Sometimes hearing those things and not having an explanation for why they're happening, people may jump to the conclusion that this person is declining cognitively, or maybe something is happening there, where they're potentially losing their independence. And that's a huge thing for older adults. Having worked in hospice, I think every single person I interacted with and worked with had some challenge in losing different parts of their, ability and their independence. And so that can be another reason that might prevent people from coming forward when they're experiencing financial fraud. They may worry that this will be a sign to their family, their, caretakers, their doctors, that maybe they need more care and support and can't kind of manage their own finances or other aspects of their life. So just something that's helpful to keep in mind. These are a few examples of technology that are meant to specifically meet the needs of older adults. There are, apps out there for medication reminders where, they're putting in information about the medications that they're taking, when they need to take it, getting alerts when they need to take it. And so that's, information that could be helpful to a potential perpetrator, or a means for them to, disrupt the person's life. Stair lifts, might be present in somebody's home for them to get up and down the stairs without the risk of falling. Some people have vital sign monitors, things like pacemakers, and those technologies and devices now, send medical information to their doctors or their insurance companies. And so it's just another opportunity for bad actors to get information about a person. There's also assistive technologies, and these are technologies, items, services, devices that are really meant to increase accessibility for people with disabilities, and certainly older adults can fall into some of these categories. So there's, services and devices out there to support deaf or hard of hearing folks, blind or low vision, people that might have mental health or psychiatric disabilities, as well as physical disabilities. And so just another opportunity for people to either monitor someone's actions, or, they might use information to impersonate a victim. So they might be contacting, their bank or other financial institutions, and pretending to be that person in order to gain access to their accounts. They might use this as a way to threaten or harass someone. And so, if threatening to expose information or cut off access to things if they don't pay them, threatening, acting and impersonating as law enforcement or other authorities and threatening, to arrest them, or that a warrant will be put out, or some other legal action to be taken if the person doesn't pay them money.
And I do want to jump in here. We talked about, everything being Wi-Fi connected and Bluetooth connected now, like your doorbells and your fridge and all of that. But hearing aids, prosthetic limbs, things like that are also often Bluetooth connected now. So that just adds another layer of potential harassment, control, whatever that may be.
Yes, thank you so much, Ashton. Yeah, this slide kind of goes over some of those examples of different assistive technologies that can be used. So flashing doorbells, for folks that are deaf or hard of hearing, they might have doorbells that have a flashing light, or fire alarm smoke detectors that have a flashing light, their phones. And so again, those things can be hacked and used to just disrupt a person's life. There's many, services out there for people to be able to access phone calls, whether that's text, telephone, video relay services. And so again, those transcripts may be hacked into for people to get really sensitive information, because those are services that allow people to make phone calls to, around their Social Security benefits or Medicare or other insurance, maybe their financial institutions. And so again, there's access potentially to sensitive personal information. As Ashton mentioned, hearing aids are pretty common, and many of them connect to Bluetooth. My own parents use hearing aids, and they connect to Bluetooth. And so sometimes I'll catch them listening to music from their phone on their hearing aids, and they have to switch over. There's things like screen readers, and voice to text is something that's very readily accessible and available on most devices now. And I think is a pretty common tool that older adults use. Again, my parents prefer voice to text when they're texting, which can always be kind of a fun adventure trying to figure out what they're really trying to say. But again, those are things that many of us may even use on our own devices, and just opportunities for potential bad actors to access. We really can't talk about technology without talking about newer technologies and where that's headed. Specifically, artificial intelligence, generative AI, um, large language model or machine learning, otherwise known to many of us as ChatGPT. These are all things that are evolving really quickly. And while the tactics that scammers are using don't necessarily change, those really relatively stay the same. Kind of the methods that they're using and the technologies that they use are evolving quickly. And we're playing a little bit of catch up, like with most technologies. They come out and they can be used for really great purposes. People that exploit them and use them for not good purposes usually are ahead of us in terms of how do we, manage that and prevent that. So we're still learning a lot when it comes to artificial intelligence and deepfake technology. There are people out there working to use AI to actually combat some of that. And so those things are developing, but we still have a long way to go. And it's really changing the way that we do awareness and education. And so, as Ashton talked about earlier, with like romance scams or imposter scams, like a grandparent scam, AI is being used to clone voices. And so there's technology that allows people to take information that's publicly out there on the internet, with social media, a lot of people post videos. And so they can take the likeness of their voice, their appearance, and be able to clone that in phone calls, for example. And so you might get a phone call from a person that actually sounds like your loved one. And it may be really difficult to recognize that that's not them. And similarly with video chats, one of the things we used to educate people on around romance scams was if you don't have a video call with them or you don't meet them in person, you can't know who they really are. AI is changing that. Now people can video chat and they might be cloning someone's face and using their pictures, and it can be very convincing. And again, this is really accessible for many people. There's a lot of free or low cost AI technologies out there. They are not the best. So there's still ways to kind of tell if you look closely that those may not be real. But there are other technologies out there that cost a little bit more money, that are much more sophisticated, and are increasingly becoming more difficult to, identify that they're AI. So just something to keep in mind. Cryptocurrency is another big thing that we see, especially in romance scams. And so that's really prevalent and a way that people are defrauding folks.